Now that we've talked about the different types of physical activity, let's talk about how to fuel an active body. A diet full of nutrient-dense foods is very important for fueling an active body. So this diet is going to provide adequate energy and adequate energy-yielding nutrients. So again, these are going to be adequate amounts of carbohydrates, lipids or fats, and protein. And we're going to talk about each of these in the coming slides. So the need for energy. Athletes may need 1,000 to 1,500 extra calories a day to prevent weight loss. So athletes are training, they're participating in games or events, so their caloric needs are dramatically increased. Additionally, after athletes exercise or participate in whatever activity, they usually have an increased metabolism after these high-intense activities. And this is known as excessive post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC. So this EPOC is what's going to lead to this increase in need for extra calories for athletes. Now, the everyday exerciser or the everyday individual does not usually require extra calories. So just because you exercise, you should not use this as an excuse to eat more. With the energy deficit that's created with moderate intensity aerobic endurance training, that's going to be enough to maintain body weight, or for someone that's looking to lose weight, to provide that energy deficit to do so. So probably you and me, just normal everyday exercisers or recreational exercisers, we don't have this excess need of additional calories as someone like a professional basketball player or an NFL player. As we've talked about before, glucose is the major and preferred fuel source for the body. It's also a major fuel for physical activity. And total glycogen stores are going to affect an individual, specifically in this case, we're going to talk about athletes. It's going to affect one's endurance. So there are several places we can get glycogen from. So we have glycogen stored in the muscles, and it's going to be used for activities. We also have glycogen that's going to be stored in the liver. And glucagon will be released by the pancreas, and this is going to help to release the glycogen from the liver and break it down into glucose so it can be used by cells and muscles. And high carbohydrate diets are important to help keep our glycogen stores full. So we can have two types of activities when we talk about endurance. So we have aerobic or we have anaerobic activities. So aerobic activities use or they require oxygen for fuel. They use glycogen very slowly, so it's usually over the course of a long term. And the energy can come from both glucose and fatty acids. So here you can see an aerobic activity would be something like step-ups, or maybe running, let's say 5 miles, or even a mile. Anaerobic activity does not require oxygen. It's usually very high intensity for a short duration and provides very quick energy, and it relies on muscle glycogen reserve. So there's no energy coming from fatty acids. So an anaerobic activity would be something like lifting weights, or even something like a sprint, or even a 400-meter dash versus the 1 mile we had over here in aerobic. Again, this would depend on someone's degree of fitness. So for me, I'm a pretty slow runner. So a 400-meter would probably be a 400-meter run, not a 400-meter dash. So again, these will differ between individuals. Lactate is produced by the anaerobic breakdown of glucose during intense physical activity. So during anaerobic activities, so the lactate will basically travel from the liver, or travel to the liver, where it will be converted back to glucose, and then it can be used by the body for additional energy needs. Lactate will accumulate, the concentration will increase, and as lactate is accumulated, you'll feel fatigued. So you might have experienced what it's called a lactate threshold. So when you start feeling that fatigue during exercise, specifically anaerobic exercises, this is due to the accumulation of lactate. Alright, so exercise duration and intensity are going to affect glycogen use. So during the first 10 minutes of exercise, glycogen is going to be used by the muscles, so the muscles are going to provide the glycogen needed for that activity. After 20 minutes, about 1/5 of available glycogen is going to be used up. So remember that glycogen stores are limited. They're not just unending. After 20 minutes, less glucose will be used, and the body is now going to rely more on fat. So again, this is indicating that this is an aerobic activity, because both glucose and fat can provide energy. After about 2 hours of vigorous exercise, glycogen stores are going to be completely depleted, and so it's going to be impossible for an individual to continue that same activity at the same intensity. It's not going to be possible because they have no more glycogen stores. Trained muscles are going to store more glycogen and actually burn more fat, so fat is becoming the preferred fuel during this time, and so therefore they'll use less glucose, and it can be used during times when energy is actually really limited. So once glycogen stores are depleted, it's going to be very important to refuel or replace these later, which moves into our diet. So let's talk about carbohydrate recommendations for postponing fatigue and maximizing performance. So it's very important to fuel with carbohydrates both before, during, and after whatever activity one is participating in. So before the activity, it's important that whatever glucose or carbohydrate-containing snack you consume, this is going to top off the glycogen stores. So make sure that they're at full capacity before starting the exercise or the event. During activity, the glucose is going to be replacing small amounts of what's been lost and really just add to those glycogen stores, so keeping them full. During activity, these should be things that are smooth textured foods that are low in fat and fiber. So if something has a lot of fiber in it during an activity, this can cause some gastric distress, so some stomach cramps, which is never a good thing when you're out exercising. So another tip is you never want to try anything new, during a race versus when you're just out, on an everyday run. You wouldn't want to try something new during your marathon or your actual race. After activity, glucose or carbohydrates are going to be needed to help enlarge or completely replenish those glycogen stores, and you should consume high carbohydrate foods within 2 hours after physical activity. So an example of this might be something like chocolate milk. If you can combine a high carbohydrate food with a little bit of protein, this is even more important to rebuild muscles and then replace those glycogen stores. So chocolate milk, yogurt, any sort of grain, maybe an apple with peanut butter, so carbohydrate and protein. So think about all those foods that we've talked about and what some good combinations would be. So unlike glucose or our glycogen, which our stores are limited, fat is basically an unlimited source of energy for physical activity. And we can find fat in our working muscles a little bit, and then we can also find fat in our adipose or fat tissues. The intensity and duration are going to affect fat use by the body, so remember that fat is going to be used during aerobic activities, so in those that require oxygen, so more of our cardiorespiratory aerobic activities, so again, like running, playing basketball for a long time, doing the elliptical, bike riding, versus something just like lifting weights. Trained muscles develop more fat-burning enzymes, so that again, it's going to increase the use of fat. Looking at fat recommendations for athletes, high-fat diets are not recommended for endurance athletes in particular, because if something is high-fat, it's going to be low carbohydrate, and as we just discussed, carbohydrates are very, very, very important for keeping those glycogen stores full, because glucose is our main fuel for physical activity. Just like in everyday, just like normal individuals, athletes should still aim for 20 to 35% of their calories from fat. Getting these from our healthy fats, so vegetable oils, nuts, olives, fatty fish. And what's important with our fatty fish, things like salmon would be an example, is that these may also be important in helping to reduce inflammation. So long bouts of physical activity or repeated bouts of physical activity can actually cause some inflammation in the body. So consuming adequate amounts of omega-3 fatty acids can help to reduce or even prevent that inflammation. Now moving on to proteins. So proteins are going to be very important for muscle building. They don't play as big a role in fueling, but they do play some role in fueling. But protein is very important for muscle building. So the intake of amino acids, which remember those are building blocks of protein, are going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Muscles are going to reach their maximum rate of protein synthesis when all of the essential amino acids are supplied. Specifically, leucine is one that is called out in your book, and this one's very important for helping to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Contrary to popular belief, taking protein supplements is not going to force muscles to make new protein. So remember again that protein is not stored by the body. So any protein taken in by protein supplements, not going to be stored, not going to stimulate muscle growth. So again, you're going to have very expensive urine. So protein supplements are probably not worth it for most individuals. As far as protein timing goes, the synthesis is greatest in the 2 hours following exercise activity. So again, choosing a protein-rich food after physical activity can help maximize muscle synthesis. And again, combining that with a carbohydrate is going to replace those glycogen fuels as well. So chocolate milk is a great example of a carbohydrate, protein-rich food. And again, the increased rate of protein synthesis is going to be supported by the intake of all essential amino acids. As far as protein for fuel, the regulation of protein use during physical activity is regulated by diet, the exercise intensity and duration, and degree of training. So we want to make sure that we have sufficient carbohydrate diets because carbohydrates and glucose are preferred fuels. We don't want to have to use protein for fuel because we need protein to maintain our muscle mass. Exercise intensity and duration. Any sort of exercise that lasts more than 1 hour is going to become a little bit more dependent on protein for fuel because at that point, again, our glucose, the glycogen stores are going to start to become depleted. And the degree of training also influences. So as someone becomes more fit, their body's preferred source of energy is going to change as well. So recommendations for athletes, again, sufficient carbohydrate intake is important. We don't want to limit carbohydrates. Protein needs are usually increased in athletes, and the DRI is going to depend on one's activity. So the DRI for protein for everyday individuals is 0.8 grams per kilogram. For power athletes, it's going to increase to about 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram, and for endurance athletes, 1.2 to 1.4. So athletes do have a little bit higher need for protein. And again, this is to stimulate maximum muscle synthesis. Most athletes can get adequate protein from a balanced diet, so that, again, there's no need for supplements in that manner.